Welcome to Conspiracy Theories Podcast. I'm your host, Noah Smith, and in today's episode, we unravel one of the most enduring and controversial stories in the world of global finance, the Rothschild family. For centuries, their name has been synonymous with wealth, secrecy, and power. Some say they quietly control the world's banks, wars, and governments. Others insist it's all myth. Are the Rothschilds a powerful dynasty or the invisible hand behind global events? The Rothschild story begins in the heart of 18th century Europe, in the Jewish ghetto of Frankfurt, Germany. It was there that Mayer Amschel Rothschild, born in 1744, laid the foundation for what would become one of the most influential financial dynasties in modern history. At a time when Jews were largely excluded from political and economic power, Mayer's ability to navigate restrictive social and legal structures made his rise all the more extraordinary. He began by dealing in rare coins and collectibles, eventually gaining the trust of royalty and wealthy patrons, including Prince Wilhelm of Hesse, one of the richest men in Europe. But Mayer's true innovation was his vision of a pan-European banking network, run not by emissaries or intermediaries, but by his own sons. He sent them to key financial capitals. Amschel stayed in Frankfurt, Solomon went to Vienna, Nathan to London, Karl to Naples, and James to Paris. Together they formed a private, tightly coordinated network that could move money faster, more discreetly, and with greater trust than nearly any government treasury or central bank. In an era when communication was slow and banking was localized, this structure gave the Rothschilds a distinct advantage. Europe in the early 19th century was defined by upheaval. The Napoleonic Wars reshaped borders, economies, and alliances. During this period of instability, the Rothschilds established themselves not only as bankers, but as essential players in international finance. They financed armies, brokered peace treaties, and underwrote the debts of entire nations. Nathan Rothschild, based in London, was particularly instrumental. He became known for his aggressive tactics in the bond market and for financing Britain's war effort against Napoleon. The family's ascent coincided with the rise of modern capitalism and the expanding influence of financial institutions over governments. National debt was no longer seen as a liability, but as a tool of leverage. The Rothschilds were among the first to grasp this concept fully, using it to build relationships with monarchies and republics alike. They operated behind the scenes, avoiding public attention, but their impact was felt across Europe. They weren't simply funding governments, they were shaping them. Their Jewish heritage, combined with their vast wealth and cross-border influence, made the Rothschilds both admired and resented. In a Europe still deeply steeped in anti-Semitism, their prominence fed long-standing fears about Jewish control over money. Cartoons, pamphlets, and political screeds from the 19th century onwards portrayed them as puppet masters and schemers. Narratives that would eventually fuel more elaborate and sinister conspiracy theories in the decades to come. The structure of the family business was also unusual. It was deliberately kept private, with intermarriage within the family used to consolidate wealth and control. Unlike other financial empires that went public or diluted ownership, the Rothschilds maintained a level of secrecy and cohesion that made them harder to scrutinize. They did not seek titles or political office, but their access to those in power was unmatched. This combination of discretion, wealth, and influence gave rise to whispers that would eventually turn into full-fledged suspicions. By the mid-19th century, the Rothschild name had become a fixture in global finance. Railroads, mining operations, sovereign bonds, across industries and continents, their reach extended. Yet for all their visibility and economic records, their personal lives remained largely private. This duality, ubiquitous in finance, yet elusive in public, planted the seeds for the mythology that would grow around them. As new generations took over, and as the family shifted more toward investment and philanthropy, the perception of hidden influence only deepened. In the public mind, they had moved from financiers to symbols of something greater, something hidden and perhaps controlling. As the Rothschild banking dynasty solidified its position across Europe, each branch took on strategic roles that not only expanded their influence, but deepened the perception that this was more than a family of financiers. It was a network operating on a global scale. By the mid-1800s, the Rothschilds were funding national infrastructure projects, underwriting the issuance of government bonds, and providing emergency loans during financial crises. Each of the five sons operated semi-independently, yet coordinated closely, often outpacing central banks in speed and flexibility. Nathan Rothschild's London branch became the nerve center for international dealings. It was from here that one of the most enduring and controversial episodes of Rothschild history unfolded: the alleged manipulation of the London Stock Exchange following the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. According to the legend, Nathan received news of Napoleon's defeat before the British government and used this intelligence to deceive investors. By allegedly selling British bonds and triggering panic, then quietly buying them back at a lower price, he supposedly made a fortune and increased his control over British finances. The story has been widely repeated, though modern historians question its accuracy. Still, it became a cornerstone of the Rothschild mythos: financial genius mixed with cold opportunism, all cloaked in secrecy. Meanwhile, James Rothschild in Paris was rising in prominence within French society. He became a major financier of railways, canals, and mining operations, and held influence in both government and aristocratic circles. His reputation as a generous patron of the arts did little to reduce speculation about the true extent of his power. In Vienna, Salomon Rothschild was backing industrial development, helping finance Austria's transition into a modern economy. Karl's Naples branch provided a foothold in the Italian peninsula, while Amschel maintained the family's Frankfurt operations and served as a central hub. One of the most important aspects of the Rothschild strategy was their role as intermediaries in delicate political and diplomatic situations. They provided financial services during wars, revolutions, and regime changes, always ensuring they remained indispensable regardless of who held political power. During the 1820s, for instance, the Rothschilds negotiated loans to stabilize post-war France, playing a key role in the economic restoration of a country that had only recently been their enemy. Their ability to operate across religious, national, and political boundaries was unique and often unsettling to those who preferred power to remain within traditional hierarchies. The Rothschilds were also instrumental in the creation and expansion of global capital markets. They pioneered the practice of syndicated lending, wherein multiple banks would fund a single large loan, often to a sovereign state, spreading risk and influence across institutions. This model, now commonplace, was groundbreaking at the time and reinforced their central role in shaping modern finance. With their access to political leaders and their control over massive capital flows, they didn't just respond to events, they helped shape them. By the second half of the 19th century, the Rothschild name had become synonymous with banking power. Their family crest, their letters of correspondence, their agents moving quietly between capitals, all carried a weight of influence unmatched by other families. Yet as their visibility increased, so did public suspicion. In political cartoons, they were portrayed as octopuses with tentacles wrapped around the globe. In private circles, they were the subject of whispered rumors about manipulation, control, and hidden agendas. Though many of these fears lack clear evidence, the family's global reach, combined with their low public profile, provided fertile ground for speculation that would only grow more elaborate in the decades to follow. The most persistent claims that fuel the Rothschild conspiracy theory revolve around the idea of hidden influence. Suggestions that the family not only accumulated wealth, but leveraged it to steer the course of nations, manipulate economies, and even provoke wars. At the heart of these claims is the belief that the Rothschilds didn't merely participate in the financial system, they quietly designed and controlled it. One of the most frequently cited pieces of evidence is their involvement in funding both sides of major European conflicts. Critics point to the Napoleonic Wars, the Crimean War, and later the Franco-Prussian War, suggesting that Rothschild money flowed to all belligerents, ensuring that whoever won, they profited. While it's true that the family financed multiple governments during wartime, often with the goal of stabilizing financial markets or preserving national credit, the claim that they orchestrated these wars for gain lacks solid proof. Nonetheless, the perception of neutrality in the service of profit is a potent image that feeds suspicions of manipulation on a grand scale. Another frequently repeated claim is that the Rothschilds created or dominated central banks around the world, acting as shadow rulers behind national economies. Some of these allegations focus on the Bank of England and the U.S. Federal Reserve. While the Rothschilds did have connections with central banks, particularly in the 19th century when private banks often acted as intermediaries for governments, there's no verifiable evidence that they ever owned or controlled them. Yet the theory persists, aided by the mystique of high finance and the opacity of central banking operations. Perhaps the most enduring and provocative phrase associated with the family is one attributed to Mayer Amschel Rothschild: "Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws." This quote has been widely circulated in books, documentaries, and websites focused on elite control of the financial system. However, no original source confirms that he ever said it. Still, its appeal is undeniable, as it neatly summarizes the fear that money, not democracy, truly governs nations. In the modern era, the idea that the Rothschilds manipulate international institutions such as the IMF, World Bank, and the European Central Bank has become another cornerstone of the theory. These institutions are powerful, secretive, and often seen as unaccountable. When economic crises hit, whether in Greece, Argentina, or elsewhere, critics point to shadowy financial elites as the puppet masters behind the curtain. Because the Rothschild name is so strongly linked to the history of global banking, it is frequently invoked as a symbol, even when no direct evidence connects them to the events in question. The family's ties to Israel have also drawn scrutiny. The Rothschilds were early supporters of Zionism, funding institutions, schools, and land purchases in what would become the modern state. Conspiracy theorists have interpreted this support as evidence of a plan for territorial dominance, folding the Rothschilds into broader theories about secret Zionist agendas and geopolitical engineering. These claims often draw on long-standing anti-Semitic tropes, repackaged in the language of globalism and elite manipulation. Perhaps the most striking aspect of these claims is how they have evolved over time. New events, from 9/11 to the 2008 financial crisis, are quickly folded into the narrative. Any major geopolitical shift or economic disruption is viewed through the lens of control. The Rothschilds, as a symbol of invisible wealth and influence, remain a constant in these theories. It doesn't matter that their role in modern finance has diminished significantly from their 19th century peak. In the realm of conspiracy, the past casts a very long shadow. To understand the staying power of the Rothschild conspiracy theory, it's essential to examine the claims more critically and evaluate the underlying evidence, or lack thereof. Many of the arguments hinge on circumstantial connections, historical anecdotes, or unverified quotations that, when repeated often enough, take on the veneer of truth. But a closer inspection reveals a pattern. While the Rothschilds were undeniably powerful, the leap from influence to omnipotent control is rarely supported by concrete facts. Take, for instance, the oft-repeated claim that the Rothschilds own most of the world's central banks. This assertion is typically accompanied by lists of dozens of national banks, sometimes more than 100, allegedly under Rothschild ownership or control. However, nearly all modern central banks are public institutions governed by national laws, overseen by state authorities, and subject to varying degrees of political accountability. There's no documented ownership or direct control by the Rothschild family over these institutions. What often fuels this claim is a confusion between the Rothschilds' historical roles as financiers for governments and the structural changes in global banking that occurred long after their peak. The Waterloo incident is another frequently cited piece of proof that collapses under scrutiny. The narrative that Nathan Rothschild used early knowledge of Napoleon's defeat to crash the London Stock Exchange and buy up the British economy is based more on legend than fact. Contemporary records show no market collapse of the scale described, and historians have debunked the idea that Rothschild's agents outpaced the British government's communications. While Rothschild did profit from the war by handling British bonds, there's no credible evidence of the dramatic market manipulation often claimed. Quotes attributed to Mayer Amschel Rothschild are similarly problematic. The line about controlling a nation's money being more powerful than its laws has never been verified in any of his documented writings or correspondence. Yet this phrase continues to circulate widely in literature, online forums, and documentaries. Its appeal lies in its clarity and emotional impact, but its authenticity remains highly doubtful. Misattributed or fabricated quotations have long been a tool used to lend weight to speculative narratives, especially when they seem to affirm a suspicion already held. Even the idea that the Rothschilds maintain their status as the wealthiest family in the world today lacks support. While the family was once considered the richest in the 19th century, their wealth has since been eclipsed by newer fortunes in technology, oil, and industrial sectors. Contemporary financial rankings no longer list the Rothschilds among the top individual billionaires, and their banking empire has splintered into various regional branches and investment firms, many of which operate independently and are subject to regulatory oversight. Claims about their influence over global events, from revolutions to recessions, tend to rely on guilt by association. If a Rothschild entity had any financial interest in a region or sector affected by crisis, that connection is often cited as evidence of orchestration, regardless of the context or causality. This selective interpretation of facts plays a central role in conspiracy thinking. Connections are treated as proof, and the absence of transparency is taken as confirmation of secrecy. What remains after the claims are examined is a picture of a historically significant, wealthy family that played a pivotal role in the development of modern finance, but not a shadow government controlling the world. Still, for many believers, the mythology persists, and the durability of that belief may have more to do with psychology, cultural archetypes, and distrust of institutions than it does with any verifiable truth. While the Rothschild conspiracy theory continues to attract believers, a significant body of criticism has emerged to counter its claims, both from historians and financial experts, as well as sociologists and psychologists who study the origins and impact of conspiracy thinking. Their collective assessment is that while the Rothschild family played a major role in shaping 19th century banking, the theory of their secret domination over global affairs is largely built on exaggeration, misinterpretation, and in many cases, deeply rooted anti-Semitic narratives repackaged for modern times. Historians emphasize that the structure of global finance has evolved drastically since the Rothschilds' golden age. In the 19th century, private banking houses were crucial intermediaries for national governments, and the Rothschilds were at the forefront of that movement. But the rise of state-run central banks, nationalized financial systems, and large multinational corporations shifted power away from individual families. Even where Rothschild entities still exist today, such as Rothschild & Co. in Europe or the various investment arms of the family, they operate under strict regulatory frameworks, just like any other financial institution. There is no credible evidence that they wield covert influence over world events. Critics also point to the flawed logic often employed in these theories. For instance, when the Rothschilds are involved in a financial transaction, it is seen as confirmation of their control. When they are absent from the picture, it is interpreted as evidence that they are pulling strings from behind the scenes. This kind of circular reasoning makes the theory impervious to falsification, an essential feature of conspiratorial thinking. It treats a lack of evidence not as disproof, but as further confirmation of how well hidden the alleged control must be. Moreover, scholars have drawn attention to how the Rothschild conspiracy functions as a proxy for broader fears about globalization, capitalism, and elite power. In this light, the Rothschilds are less actual players and more symbolic targets, a stand-in for unease with a financial world that feels increasingly complex and beyond the reach of ordinary people. By assigning a name and a family to that anxiety, the theory provides a sense of clarity, even if the story it tells doesn't hold up to scrutiny. One of the most dangerous elements, critics warn, is the theory's reliance on long-standing anti-Semitic tropes. Claims of secret cabals, global manipulation, and undue financial influence echo themes from notorious texts like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a proven hoax that has fueled hatred and violence for over a century. By framing the Rothschilds as omnipotent puppet masters, these narratives perpetuate harmful stereotypes and provide fuel for extremist ideologies. This is why many watchdog groups and scholars have condemned the Rothschild conspiracy theory not just as misleading, but as dangerous. The modern Rothschild family has addressed these issues sparingly. Their current public presence is limited, and their various financial institutions focus primarily on wealth management and investment advisory services. They do not hold political office, do not own major media networks, and their known financial influence is a fraction of what it once was. Yet their name continues to circulate in forums, videos, and articles that portray them as omnipresent and omnipotent, a paradox that reflects less about reality and more about the psychological mechanics of belief. Skeptics argue that the persistence of the Rothschild myth says more about the erosion of public trust in institutions than it does about the family itself. As inequality grows and as economic systems feel increasingly rigged to favor a powerful few, people look for someone to blame. In the absence of transparency or accountability from genuine power centers, symbolic figures like the Rothschilds become lightning rods. The irony is that in chasing shadows, attention may be diverted from the very real structures of power that operate in plain sight. The Rothschild conspiracy theory's longevity can also be traced to the deeper cultural and psychological themes it taps into, ones that extend far beyond finance or family lineage. At its core, this theory resonates because it crystallizes a fundamental human anxiety, the suspicion that unseen forces are guiding the course of history, that ordinary people are pawns in a game they neither understand nor control. The Rothschilds, whether intentionally or not, have become a vessel for that fear, a name onto which generations have projected their unease with modernity itself. The story of the Rothschilds is uniquely suited for this role. Their historical wealth, their early control over transnational banking networks, their preference for discretion, all create a portrait of mystery and power. But more importantly, their story unfolds alongside the rise of modern capitalism, industrialization, and the nation-state. As the world transformed rapidly in the 19th and 20th centuries, people looked for narratives to make sense of the chaos. The Rothschild name provided one such narrative, a through line of continuity in a time of dislocation, a hidden hand when the world felt unmoored. Psychologically, conspiracy theories offer something comforting in their structure. They provide clear villains and explain seemingly random or unjust outcomes with purpose. A global financial collapse isn't just a complex interplay of deregulation, speculation, and systemic weakness. It's the result of a deliberate plan. Wars, revolutions, even pandemics are seen not as unpredictable human events, but as steps in a centuries-long agenda. This reductionist logic can be emotionally satisfying, even empowering. Believing in the theory makes the believer feel aware, savvy, and resistant to manipulation. It offers a sense of control in a world that often feels overwhelming. Culturally, the Rothschild myth has evolved to fit new paradigms. In earlier centuries, it mirrored fears about aristocracy, royalty, and foreign influence. In the 20th century, it took on shades of Cold War paranoia and post-war distrust of global institutions. Today, it has been adapted to fit narratives about the deep state, globalism, and technocratic governance. It weaves easily into modern concerns about digital surveillance, elite overreach, and the erosion of national sovereignty. The theory is elastic. It molds itself to fit whatever moment it inhabits. It also intersects with populist rhetoric. Politicians and commentators across the ideological spectrum have, at various times, invoked vague notions of financial puppeteers, shadowy elites, or international bankers to explain complex problems. While not always naming the Rothschilds explicitly, these messages often draw on the same archetypes. This coded language reinforces suspicion of centralized authority while avoiding the overt markers of traditional antisemitism. But the narrative structure remains the same. A small, unaccountable group manipulates world events for their own benefit. This dynamic creates a feedback loop. Each new crisis or scandal can be interpreted as further proof of the Rothschilds' hidden role. The lack of visibility becomes part of the myth. If they're not seen, it's because they don't want to be seen. If they're not mentioned in mainstream coverage, it's because they control the media. Rational explanations are discarded in favor of increasingly elaborate ones. In this way, the theory becomes immune to contradiction. Any evidence against it is seen as planted or controlled. The broader implication is not just about one family, but about how societies process uncertainty and inequality. When systems become too opaque or too unfair, people search for answers that make emotional sense. In the absence of accountability from those who truly hold power, whether corporations, politicians, or institutions, narratives like the Rothschild conspiracy fill the void. They may be factually incorrect, but they offer a kind of moral coherence. And in a world defined by complexity, coherence, even false coherence, can be more seductive than truth. The Rothschild conspiracy theory's influence on modern society extends far beyond books, videos, and online message boards. It has embedded itself into the fabric of political discourse, media narratives, and public suspicion. Over time, the theory has evolved from whispered rumors in 19th century salons to globalized digital folklore that spans continents and cultures. In this transformation, it has come to serve not just as a story about one family, but as a catch-all explanation for nearly every global event perceived as unjust, coordinated, or mysterious. In media, the Rothschilds are rarely mentioned directly by name in mainstream coverage, but their symbolic role has persisted, especially in fringe platforms where the family is invoked as shorthand for elite power. From populist radio shows to anonymous social media accounts, any discussion of economic collapse, international conflict, or secret treaties can quickly veer into Rothschild territory. This pattern is especially noticeable in online echo chambers, where distrust of mainstream institutions runs deep. In these spaces, the family functions less as a subject of discussion and more as a totem, used to validate broader narratives about globalist agendas, banking cartels, and engineered chaos. The theory's adoption by a wide ideological spectrum has also contributed to its staying power. On the far right, it merges with nationalist fears of eroded sovereignty and perceived threats from foreign influence. On the far left, it intersects with critiques of capitalism and financial exploitation. Both perspectives can invoke the Rothschild myth without necessarily acknowledging its origins in anti-Semitic propaganda. The name becomes a placeholder for any system deemed too powerful, too opaque, or too rigged against the common citizen. Even in mainstream culture, the idea of hidden elites pulling strings behind closed doors has become a recurring motif. Television shows, films, and novels frequently borrow the framework of shadowy financial families or secretive balls, exerting control over governments, media, or science. While not naming the Rothschilds directly, these fictional depictions draw on the same fears, the sense that democracy is a facade, and that the real decisions are made in boardrooms and mansions far from public scrutiny. Social movements have also been touched by the theory. During times of unrest, financial crises, global pandemics, or controversial elections, public frustration often coalesces into a search for accountability. In the absence of clear answers or visible transparency, long-standing theories resurface. During the 2008 financial crash, mentions of the Rothschilds spiked across conspiracy forums. When economic lockdowns were implemented during the COVID-19 pandemic, their name reappeared in discussions about vaccine patents, digital currency, and the so-called New World Order. The theory adapts with each generation, linking itself to current anxieties while retaining the same foundational suspicions. The internet has accelerated this diffusion. Algorithms prioritize emotionally charged content, and the Rothschild conspiracy is tailor-made for that environment. Videos with ominous music and vintage imagery of the family's estates receive millions of views. Posts that frame historical facts alongside speculative commentary go viral with ease. The sheer volume of repetition gives these narratives the illusion of credibility, particularly to individuals already inclined to question mainstream narratives. Fact checks and expert rebuttals rarely travel as far or as fast. This media ecosystem allows for a kind of narrative metastasis, where theories, once confined to the fringes, become normalized through constant repetition. As people encounter the Rothschild myth across multiple platforms and contexts, they may not fully believe it, but they absorb its language, its tropes, and its implications. Over time, even casual mentions reinforce the idea that there is something to the story, some kernel of truth buried beneath layers of denial. In this way, the Rothschild conspiracy becomes less about facts and more about cultural function. It expresses frustration, disillusionment, and the desire to identify a clear enemy in a world that often feels unjust and directionless. Whether treated with skepticism or belief, its continued presence in public discourse reveals just how deep the appetite remains for a narrative that explains the world, not through systems and policies, but through the actions of a hidden few. On the outer edges of the Rothschild narrative lie the more speculative, fringe, and often surreal interpretations, claims that move well beyond historical fact and into the realm of the fantastical. These theories are not just exaggerations of known history. They represent an entirely alternate worldview where the Rothschilds are cast not merely as wealthy bankers, but as central figures in a hidden, transgenerational plot for world domination. In these corners of the conspiracy world, the Rothschild name becomes fused with ideas of secret societies, occult knowledge, and even extraterrestrial manipulation. One recurring theme is the idea that the Rothschilds are part of a shadowy global elite, often linked to groups like the Illuminati, the Bilderberg Group, or Freemasons. In this narrative, world events are not shaped by politics, economics, or social forces, but by secret councils composed of ancient bloodlines who wield hidden knowledge and control through symbols, rituals, and unseen influence. The Rothschilds in this telling are said to hold a central seat at the table, managing not just financial systems, but global consciousness itself. Some versions of the theory claim that the family maintains hidden control over nearly all world institutions, central banks, international media, intelligence agencies, and even religious organizations. They are said to orchestrate wars to realign geopolitical boundaries, crash economies to seize assets, and engineer social movements to steer public behavior. These ideas often include references to numerology, esoteric codes, and ancient prophecies, all used to suggest that the Rothschilds operate on a level of planning far beyond any democratic oversight or public accountability. In even more fringe interpretations, the Rothschilds are no longer fully human. They are described as hybrid beings linked to ancient alien bloodlines or interdimensional entities working toward a new phase of human evolution or control. These beliefs, while sounding outlandish, are taken seriously within certain online communities where science fiction, religious prophecy, and historical revisionism collide. The Rothschilds become avatars of the hidden hand, immortal, all-knowing, operating across centuries with a single, unwavering goal. Another variation of the theory proposes that the family uses advanced technology to manipulate weather, stock markets, and even human behavior. Here, they're connected to programs like HAARP, CERN, and digital surveillance networks allegedly capable of mass mind control. The idea is that through technological dominance, the Rothschilds can engineer crises and shape perception, maintaining global order through fear, distraction, and engineered dependency. These fringe views are often dismissed by skeptics and mainstream observers as delusional or satirical, but their prevalence online and their overlap with more moderate conspiracy theories make them noteworthy. They serve a specific psychological function. By attributing overwhelming, complex problems to a singular enemy, they offer believers a sense of certainty and structure. The absurdity of the claims is not a deterrent. In many cases, it's a feature. The more fantastical the theory, the more it reinforces the idea that the truth is being deliberately hidden. It's also important to recognize that these speculative narratives often draw upon darker undercurrents, including old anti-Semitic myths that frame Jewish families as secret controllers of the world. Even when cloaked in modern language about globalism or elite power, these stories carry forward dangerous legacies, giving them new form in a digital age. They appeal not only to those seeking answers, but also to those seeking enemies, real or imagined. At their core, these theories are not about the Rothschilds as individuals or even as a family. They are about power without accountability, systems that seem to operate above scrutiny, and the human desire to find order in chaos. The more disconnected people feel from political processes, economic fairness, and institutional trust, the more likely they are to believe in hidden masters. In this climate, the Rothschild myth thrives, not because it's true, but because it fills a void left by something very real: the absence of transparency in a world run by powerful interests. The Rothschild conspiracy theory, in all its variations, from the historical to the fantastical, tells us as much about society as it does about the family at its center. What began as a legitimate story of financial innovation and generational wealth has transformed into something far more potent and symbolic. Over the centuries, the Rothschild name has been used to represent wealth, secrecy, control, and fear. It has become a mirror reflecting our collective anxieties about power, inequality, and the invisible mechanisms that seem to govern our lives. For some, the Rothschilds are a convenient scapegoat, a focal point for frustrations about globalization, financial injustice, and the erosion of national sovereignty. For others, they symbolize an elite that has detached itself from the concerns of ordinary people. And for a growing number immersed in alternative narratives, they serve as evidence of a shadow world, one where decisions are made in silence, where democracy is a facade, and where the real rulers of the earth hide in plain sight. But this theory persists not just because of what people believe about the Rothschilds, but because of how those beliefs are fed. We live in a world where financial systems are staggeringly complex, where the rich often operate behind closed doors, and where the average citizen feels increasingly alienated from the levers of power. In such a world, conspiracy theories don't just survive, they flourish. They offer a narrative, a sense of agency, and a target for outrage. They simplify the incomprehensible and give meaning to chaos. This isn't to suggest that power doesn't concentrate in elite hands. It often does. But the danger lies in confusing symbolic narratives with actual accountability. The real mechanisms of influence, corporate lobbying, opaque financial instruments, international policymaking, operate in broad daylight, often without meaningful oversight. By focusing on a mythologized family from the 18th century, attention is diverted from these tangible, ongoing dynamics. There's also a real cost to embracing such narratives without evidence. The Rothschild myth has served as a gateway to more extreme ideologies, including virulent antisemitism that distorts history and dehumanizes entire communities. While modern variants of the theory may avoid overt ethnic language, the underlying structure of suspicion remains unchanged. It is crucial to recognize this continuity and to understand how easily conspiracy can slip into prejudice. At the same time, dismissing all suspicion as irrational can be equally dangerous. People turn to conspiracy theories when they feel ignored, powerless, or deceived. To address the rise of such beliefs, we must go beyond fact-checking and censorship. We must rebuild trust in institutions, increase transparency, and foster genuine public engagement with systems of power. Only then can the hunger for hidden truths begin to subside. The Rothschild conspiracy, then, is not merely a story about one family. It is a symptom of deeper discontent, a warning sign, a cultural code that signals a longing for clarity in a world that often refuses to offer it. Whether or not the Rothschilds ever held the level of influence attributed to them, their name has become something more, a symbol of how mystery, money, and mistrust can converge into powerful narratives that endure for generations. Thanks for listening to Conspiracy Theories Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you would like to support the show, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.